Welcome to Vernacular Verbose, Jethro Tull podcast. My name's Joey Vetter.
My name's Eugene Manko.
And today we're taking a look at The Broadsword and the Beast, released in 1982. If you enjoyed the podcast and are feeling generous, you can support us on Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. Any donations will go right back into the production of the podcast by helping us to cover our editing costs. Again, that's ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. So there's a couple of unique things that we can say about this one right off the bat, but one of the things that I think of the most when I think of Broadsword is just the fact that in fan opinion, sort of writ large on the internet, it feels to me that this is kind of the most highly praised 80s Tull album. Do you get that feeling also, Eugene?
Maybe. Could just be my confirmation bias, because this is, for me, probably my favorite 80s Tull album. For a number of reasons, but I'm not sure. I don't think I've read a lot of praise about it. People don't normally. It doesn't seem to me like people talk about it a lot.
Yeah, I think pretty much every 80s Tull album is sort of under discussed to a certain degree, but I feel like this one is defended the most just from what I've seen, and that it has the most positive things said about it that I've seen online. I think the thing that comes to mind when I think of what this album presents musically and that kind of thing, and kind of what it contributes to the Tull discography. If after, with A, you had something that was very kind of left field for what would traditionally be considered a Tull album at the time. And Broadsword, in a way, kind of feels to me like it was more of a conscious effort to steer the conversation back to Jethro Tull, that this is a Jethro Tull album. So there's a lot of things about the album that kind of signal a return to what may be more traditional Tull things. So, for example, I often see people describing this album as kind of synth folk, where it's kind of a mixture of the older folky Tull style with the synths of the 80s and that kind of thing. But that said, I also think there's a lot of things about this album that actually differentiate it from a lot of the Tull stuff that came before, and that make it kind of stand out in its own unique way.
That's true. Do you find that there are more examples of things that make it a Tull album rather than an Ian Anderson solo album released as Tull, as it was with A?
Well, what's kind of interesting is, so when I listened to this album in preparation for this episode, it was the first time I had heard the full thing from beginning to end in quite a long time.
Really?
And so there's a couple of the tracks that they weren't new to me, but they were kind of like, I don't know, digging up an old crypt or something and opening it for the first time in a while. And I was kind of surprised by how different it sounded to what I was expecting, I guess, from what I remembered of the album and what my feelings were about it. A lot of it was very it was very 80s rock, I guess is the best way I can put it. There's a lot of tracks on here, as we'll talk about, that to me they feel like they're very much consciously trying to go for kind of an arena rock style, kind of, style of rock music that was popular at the time. It feels like there was a very conscious, goal to try to go for that kind of sound. And that was the kind of thing that I was surprised that I don't really remember that about this album that much.
Yeah, that's true. It does have kind of an AOR feel in places. Partially because, Tull stuff has always been very polyphonic. There's always been a lot of counterpoints and a lot of complicated relationships between melodies in different instruments.
Yeah, and I think part of me wonders if part of the reason for that sort of specific focus on that style actually comes from the fact that the most unique thing about this album, maybe, in the entire discography, is this is the only Tull album that had an outside third-party producer. So Paul Samwell Smith, who I unfortunately can't really say that I know anything about, aside from the fact that he was in the Yardbirds, was actually brought in as the producer of this album. So the only time that has ever happened, for someone who's not Ian Anderson or Terry Ellis. So that's kind of an interesting thing, and I wonder the degree to which that influenced the making of this album, and I hope and I suspect we'll learn a lot more about that when the remix for this album comes out next year.
Yeah.
So that's a very unusual thing for Tull, and I'm curious how Ian dealt with that. I'm curious how the band dealt with it, and I think it's kind of an episode of Tull history that isn't at this point explored very much.
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot of information about the producer at the time. All right, so the lineup on this album is quite new.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, so on the member lineup, we have Ian Anderson on vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, Martin Barr on electric guitar, Dave Pegg on bass, Jerry Conway on drums, and Peter John Vitesi on keyboards. So I think the big one to talk about here is Peter John Vitesse, just because
Obviously.
to me he is one of the members of Tull and Tull history who have gotten the least credit for sort of what they've done in the band and the impact that they had on the band. Because in the period he was in the band, so from 82 to late 80s, somewhere in there, particularly with the first two albums that he was on, so Broadsword and Under Wraps, the impact he had on both of those albums, as well as Walk Into Light, Ian's solo album, which was essentially an Ian Anderson and Peter Vitesse collaborative album, is huge. And particularly with him being so young when he came into the band, I know he was significantly younger than everybody else, and Ian kind of always made a point of explaining that every time he had an interview about him, that it's really impressive that he was able to come in and change the band that much and have that much of an impact on the sound.
Yeah, could be actually, now that I'm thinking about it, one of the reasons that Ian started working with younger musicians later, because this is the kind of impression that maybe Peter left, that, you know, a younger person's perspective can bring about interesting things.
Yeah. And I think also probably one of the most technically proficient keyboards that the band ever had. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen a lot of the live footage and stuff from the Broadsword era, but he was an unbelievable keyboardist. It's really amazing to watch him live.
Yeah, his piano work is fantastic.
And I think, you know, Under Wraps and Walk Into Light, I think his influence is more apparent on those albums, just, you know, because those are more synth-heavy, keys-heavy albums. But, you know, I think he was kind of working his way in at this point. But he still, you know, he colors this entire era of the band to a degree that I think even maybe a lot of Tull fans don't really give enough credit for, maybe because they don't want to give credit for it because they're not fans of it. But
yeah, that's true. If I remember right, Ian said that a lot of synth work on this album is just him playing with synthesizers in his studio, of which he acquired a lot, and Peter mostly doing piano things and adding synth arrangements, as I understand it. But yeah, surely there's a large element of Peter's sound on this album.
Ian's credited with a fair light on the liner notes, so some of the synth work was definitely Ian as well. And of course, we know on Under Wraps and things like that, he also played a lot of synth on it. I want to talk a little bit about Jerry Conway, also the drummer.
Yeah,
so
please do.
I mentioned him a little bit on a previous episode, but he was quite unique in kind of, you know, the pantheon of Tull drummers, just because he was kind of the first and probably the only Tull drummer that was more of a simple, straightforward, streamlined drummer. And, you know, which obviously that kind of goes against a lot of what Tull had in the past with, you know, amazing technical drummers like Barry Barlow and Clive Bunker. And that's something that you can hear very obviously on this album, is that there's not a lot of complicated drum stuff going on. And if you watch some of the Broadsword live stuff, you can see that as well, that he's much more of a different drummer in that respect. And he's much more of kind of a straight-laced, you know, by-the-numbers kind of drummer. I think this may be wrong. Someone can check me, but I at some point he was the drummer for Fairport Convention, and I don't know if he was at this time in the 80s, but I know at some point he was. So he was another Fairport Convention connection that was shared with Tull.
Yeah, that's interesting. The album does sound very different in terms of drumming.
Yeah,
like it's more simple, more straightforward. And one of the things I think about, this album was very successful in Germany and not very successful in the United States. And I wonder whether it was this combination of things, like a synth-based sound, straightforward drumming, fantasy cover. Maybe these were the things that made German fans connect with this album more.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because the German rock style is generally less ornate, like you have with krautrock bands.
Yeah.
Famously, you know, the bands like Can and Faust and Eloy, maybe to a lesser extent, they developed a simple drum style called motoric. And of course, another band who did that a lot was Neu, N-E-U. And yeah, maybe some of the simpler rhythmic kind of structure spoke to Germans.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't have an explanation for it. I was going to mention that too, that for whatever reason this album was huge in Germany, and I guess it's just kind of one of those funny historical things. But yeah, I don't know. It could be, but I have no idea.
Yeah, it's just a thought I had. What do you think about the cover?
I mean, generally speaking, I think it's a brilliantly put together cover. But I would actually say that, like, overall, I think it's probably one of the best Tull covers. Just the thing that bothers me, as I'm sure, you know, anybody can guess, is that the little Ian fairy thing is, you know, kind of obnoxious. And I mean, it's kind of cool, but still, it's, you know, it's pretty ridiculous to look at. But I mean, as a whole, I mean, you know, as a work of art, it's a pretty astounding cover.
Yeah, it's very well drawn. I like the sort of meta thing that the cover depicts a picture. That the cover is not in itself a picture, but it's a picture of a picture in a frame.
Yeah.
And the picture is not a picture, but a portal from which this character is emerging.
Yeah.
I'm not a massive fan of this cover, as people may probably guess, because I've spoken about Tull covers in a similar way before. Again, if this was a book, I would not assume that this was great literature. It's a very kind of fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons type thing. I really like the typeface, though, on the front cover and on the back. Not the regular kind of Elvish, Irish typeface that's used on some editions, but the very ornate, decorative type on the variant where the song titles are written on the sail of the boat. That's the typeface that I mean, and yeah, it's very nice. But overall, I don't know, it's very striking.
Yeah.
As a cover, and I can see it working very well in a record shop, you know.
Yeah, I think it actually fits the album pretty well, like in terms of aesthetic and stuff.
Yeah.
It took me a long time before I noticed the 4 heads on the edge of the frames. I think I didn't even notice that until, like, I don't know, sometime within the past year is the first time I actually saw that.
Oh, they're very clearly Tull musicians.
This was actually, the cover was made by Ian McCaig, who, just kind of an interesting fun fact, is he went on to be a really successful artist, and he was actually a character designer on the Star Wars prequel trilogy, which is kind of cool that, you know, he made it that far, just starting with a Tull album.
Yeah. Will this be the last Ian lookalike on a Tull cover? I think it probably will. Unless
you count the hand with the flute on Rock Island, I think so.
Yeah, well, no, I mean the just long-haired, bearded characters.
Yeah.
With the parade of which began on Aqualung.
Unless you count the literal Ian on the Christmas album cover.
The literal little Ian, and Rupee's dance.
Yeah, you're right. So I think we mentioned before, of course, but as we're recording this is the first album that doesn't have a remix that we're going through in the discography.
Yep.
And I will have to say that I was kind of amazed at how apparent it was to me that this album was not remixed when I just fired it up to listen to it. Because my ears immediately noticed how old it sounded. I think this is one of the most dated sounding Tull albums. I mean, to be honest, I think all of the 80s albums are very dated sounding, but this is one of them. And so I'm really looking forward to the remix for this. I think this is one of the albums that can a lot of work can be done to make it sound a lot better in a remix.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I wonder if Steven Wilson is going to do something to the drums, because that's what sticks out to me the most, really. Because in terms of mixing, I think this album has actually an incredibly cohesive sound compared to A, where instruments kind of fell apart from each other. They didn't really... The performance was very together, obviously, because they have always been fantastic musicians. But it didn't gel as much as it does on Broadsword. In terms of mixing and production, I think this album is fantastically made. And one of the points I actually wanted to make on this album, probably, rather than when we're going to talk about Under Wraps, I'm generally not a fan of the 80s in music at all. Some of the 80s albums and music in general, I find it very difficult to listen to. There are a couple bands, or more than a couple, but a couple that come to mind, who were bands who were cutting edge in the 80s, who were actually doing new things and not trying to replicate old things with new technologies. Bands like Talking Heads, or in Germany, Nina Hagen, who I admire very much. They sound natural with the kind of 80s sound. It doesn't sound out of place. While older rock acts like Tull, Pink Floyd, Genesis, who tried to apply new and frankly not very good digital technologies to their music. Like with Genesis, I really love early Genesis albums, like the Peter Gabriel era. And I can't bear listening to Invisible Touch. And it's not that Invisible Touch is a bad song, because obviously it was a massive hit. But just the sound of it just feels bad to me. One of the bands who managed to squeeze all they could from the 80s technologies because they were incredibly forward-thinking, King Crimson. I think Discipline is a fantastic example of an 80s sound in rock. But with Tull, it was very much on and off. And here on Broadsword, I think it represents a fantastic effort in just trying to make the technology work.
Something about the 80s sound just really aged badly over time. And, you know, I'm not technical enough or enough of an audiophile gearhead type person to really identify what it is. But, I mean, I think most people are familiar with that now, that most 80s music just sounds so aged and dated. And I think Tull was not really an exception to that for the most part. That, you know, most all of what Tull did in the 80s, I think, fell into that trap of sounding very dated and aged.
Exactly, because the technologies were not up to snuff yet, but they tried to make a lot of use of them. And, of course, the drumming, not the drumming, but the drum sound. I'm not sure that the reverb on the snare drum on Broadsword and the Beast is specifically gated reverb that Phil Collins came up with. But Phil Collins is a very talented man, I think. But coming up with the gated reverb, which is the kind of signature drum sound of the 80s, I think was a bit of a crime against humanity.
But I definitely think, you know, like I said, I'm really looking forward to the remix for this album, even though I wouldn't really consider myself a fan of this album necessarily, but I'm still really looking forward to the remix just because this is one of those Tull albums that has the most potential, I think, to sound a lot better through a remix. So hopefully it'll deliver. Yeah,
I'm very looking forward to that as well, because I mentioned that before. This was one of my first proper Tull records, and I used to listen to this album a lot when I was a teen, early teens. So I know it really well. And back when I was just learning about Tull, I didn't really differentiate it. For me, it was just all Tull.
Right.
It wasn't that Too Old to Rock and Roll was 70s Tull and Broadsword was 80s Tull, and they were quite different. No, it was just kind of different moods for me. I didn't make the connection that there was a technological advance in music production and so on and so forth. Of course, now that I listen to it, I recognize all of these things. But honestly, there's not a song on this album that I don't enjoy. It may not be a super genius thing like Thick as a Brick, but it's incredibly solid in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of discuss my feelings on it more in depth as we get through it. But my general take on it, you know, I don't dislike this album, but I don't really like it either. It's just kind of an album that I take what I like from it and I just kind of ignore the rest of it. You know, there's some things on here I like that I think are pretty good, and there's a lot of other things that they just kind of run together to me, and there's a couple of tracks that it's hard for me to differentiate them because they just sound very similar to each other in my opinion. But I mean, there's other things on here I like quite a bit, which I take, but it's a take it or leave it album for me. Okay, shall we take a look? But let's do it. Track 1, Beastie. So very creepy, you know, apprehensive opening right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I actually have to say that kind of from the beginning, this is not a favorite of mine from the album, mainly for the reason that I think this is one of the more dated sounding songs on the album in terms of sonics and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but it begins the album in a very striking manner. I think I can start talking about this at this point, I believe. Compositionally, this album is quite interestingly built, right? It has two halves, and this is the song that's obviously opening the first half. And we've seen a thing like that on Aqualung, actually, right? The two sides of Aqualung are called Aqualung and My God. And here we have Beastie and Broadsword, and the album is called The Broadsword and the Beast. And besides just making an attractive composition out of different tracks, I think there is a meaning that probably it may not have been intended, but it can still be drawn, because with art, our interpretations are just as valid. And there are two very highly metaphorical songs that open up both respective sides. And this one is a metaphor, or you can say for depression, or for inner demons of some sort. And the reflection on that is opening the side of the album that will deal a lot with communication and with relationships. Not in the romantic sense of the word, but in the broadest sense of connection between people. And we are starting on the inside. We are starting somewhere where the protagonist of this song is examining his inner world.
Yeah, a couple things on the title, The Broadsword and the Beast. I remember hearing that the way that title came about was that they basically couldn't decide whether to name it Broadsword or Beastie, to name the album title that. And that, so in the end, they just kind of compromised, and they call it The Broadsword and the Beast. I think there's an interview with David Letterman that Ian did in '82 when he was promoting this album, and at least some of it's on YouTube, maybe the whole thing. But it's a really good interview. It's worth watching. But I think he tells that story there. I may be wrong, but I think he talks about that there. I think that presents an interesting issue, though, because to me, the title makes it sound almost like it's a concept album, to me. Because when you hear The Broadsword and the Beast, to me, it sounds like there's a story there. There's some kind of tale. And I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, just looking at the track listings and the lyrics, it feels to me like the Broadsword and the Beastie necessarily are not entirely related, so to speak. They're kind of two different stories, two different metaphors, whereas the album title kind of infers that they're related somehow.
It does, and yeah, it's clearly not a concept album, but it's a very thematically connected album in my opinion, and I'm gonna talk about this more. And it's as thematically connected, I believe, as Aqualung, where you have the half of the album with a street theme and half of the album with a religious theme, right? Not a concept album, as Ian famously said. But here we have what I believe, what I already said, what I believe to be a focus on the connection between people, and then some stories that evolve from that kind of paint a wider picture. We'll take a look at this when we come to the following track. I wanted to talk about a little bit of the music in Beastie. It's got a lot of dissonance in it, and the way that this dissonance is allowed to work is because most of this track doesn't use full chords. It uses what's called in rock music power chords, so chords that only have fifths in them. So it can be major or minor depending on the context. Most of the track is in minor, and where we are introduced to it, it's not even minor, it's Phrygian. It's like this low second degree. So it begins with this this sort of sound, and then it switches to being minor. And the melody, most of the melody, is just plain minor pentatonic. Notes that work together no matter what, like this kind of scale. But it also has a blues note used in it, and it's a very Ian Anderson type of approaching a blues note, where mostly in like standard blues, the blues element of the blues pentatonic, the extra sixth note, used it most of the time in blues. It's used chromatically. It's used like to connect these three notes together. while Ian very much likes to lean into that dissonant interval. And we can hear that examples of that on like Beggar's Farm, or even, right? So there is a very clear focus on this note, and this is exactly what is happening here. Is just exercise the beast, where they go into that note and linger on it.
Yeah.
And there are other examples of interesting dissonant things here, when the bass suddenly plays a major third before a verse, a note that isn't anywhere else in this melody. So it clearly wants to paint that kind of apprehensive mood at the very start of the record.
Yeah, it's very apparent just from the beginning that's the mood that they're going for, I think. One thing that I dislike about it is I find the whole chorus of, the Beastie chant kind of cringy.
Uh-huh.
It reminds me of the Ghostbusters song. Actually is what it reminds me of, kind of done around the same time. But yeah, that's kind of one of the things that really turns my ear off on this one and that I'm not a fan of. Also, this isn't really particular to this song necessarily because it's kind of on the whole album, as you mentioned, but just the huge chunky snare, very much an 80s type of sound. Yeah,
but what kind of makes it less simple in terms of rhythm is the bass on this track. It adds a lot of melodic interest. Of all things, it's the bass that's doing it.
I actually kind of like the ending though.
Track 2, Clasp. I want to start with the lyrics in this one, because this is where we are being introduced to the theme of the connection between people, and this track is very clearly speaking of that. This song deals kind of with the difficulty in finding a point of contact, right? It's exploring the notion that every person is their own world, and to truly find a meaningful connection requires a conscious effort. And maybe putting this song after Beastie, after the song that shows the kind of inner turmoil and inner conflict in a person, representing the world which every person is. And then we're looking here in Clasp, we're looking at these worlds kind of drifting past each other, never being quite able to connect. And it's very much represented in music on this one by the harmony that moves obliquely beneath a single pedal point. Most obvious example is in the third verse, where we've got this thing going. Right, so there's just one note on the synthesizer in the bass, with the chords kind of drifting over it, and this is exactly kind of in my mind the representation of the effort to connect, the effort to move somewhere to a new place, and the impossibility of doing so. And when the harmony actually starts to move, like on line 3 of every verse, where cryptic signals flash across, etc., we get kind of a glimmer of hope that the connection is possible, but then it gets shut down every time in the last line of the verse. No, we're double locked and belted in, we're hand-to-hand exchange the lie. In this story, the connection is not happening. And the bridge is again in the middle of the song, the same place, like third verse of 4 different verses, the middle 8, or the bridge, or whatever you may call it. It's a glimmer of hope. It's an example of a connection made possible. Let's break the journey now on some lonely road, sit down as strangers will, let the stress unload. And this song is a reflection on trying to find a genuine connection between people and how difficult that is. I hope I'm making sense here.
Yeah, very metaphorical. I've never stopped and thought about it the way you have. It's very interesting. I think my take on this album is much more surface level, probably because I'm not as familiar with it.
Yeah, I think several years ago I actually started thinking about this album in terms of its theme and how different songs on it explore these notions. So yeah, I haven't come up with this yesterday. It's something that's been on my mind for a while.
Musically, I quite like this one. I think this is one of my favorites on the album. Mostly just because it has a really great melody, like just very strong. It's a kind of melody where, you know, there's some times where I mentioned that there's some Tull songs that I really think had the potential to be like mainstream hits that weren't. And this is another of those songs that, I mean, maybe this was a hit in Germany, I don't know, but this is another song that I think really had the potential that could have been a big song, but it just didn't quite make it. In particular, one of the things I love the most about it actually is the intro and I guess outro, the soundscapes, which I really love. And they don't really sound like something that you hear on a lot of Tull stuff. It's a little unique in that regard. And I like it so much that it's kind of surprising to me that this wasn't the opener to the album, because I think this would have worked really well as an opener, this song.
Yeah, it could have. It's kind of probably more complicated than they wanted to use for an opener. And I'm saying more complicated. I actually heard Ian and the band play this live on the last show I went to.
Oh, wow.
And I say play, I should probably say attempt, because much as I like this album, much as I'm familiar with it, I didn't recognize what they were playing for the first minute and a half. And yeah, they made an effort. It didn't work.
That's sad. One thing I'll say on this one, this is a complaint that I have about kind of a lot of this album, and even like some of the outtakes from the album as well, is that I think a lot of them have good, solid ideas, and they start off really well, but there kind of comes a point where they try to go like rock, if you know what I mean. Like they just take the existing song ideas and they try to take it to like arena rock levels, and that's kind of the point where a lot of the songs lose me. And so another example of kind of what I'm talking about, if you know the song Jacqueline, which was an outtake from Broadsword, one of a really good song, I think, and there's also a demo of it that exists from Heavy Horses era, which I actually maybe like more. But kind of the problem with that song is that I think it starts fantastic, but then they try to take it into this kind of like, you know, 80s arena rock style, and it just doesn't really work for me. Maybe because it sounds dated, maybe just because it sounds cheesy, I don't know. But that's sort of a problem I have with this song, where I feel like a similar thing kind of happens there, where it starts off really strong and has a great melody, great intro, great feeling, and then it just gets a little too 80s rock for me, and it kind of turns me off a little bit.
Do you mean in the instrumental bridge, or?
Yeah, kind of around there. But even just, I mean, you know, I guess after the first chorus, when he says, you know, the clasp, and then, you know, the guitar and everything comes in, and it kind of where the megaphone vocal starts, which that's also an interesting decision. I'm wondering if you feel any type of way about that.
Vocoder, I believe, that's what.
Oh, really?
Used.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a number of places on this album, I think, where we can hear the vocoder. No, my least favorite musically place in this one is the first half of the bridge. Let's break the journey now on some lonely road. It's just a very plain kind of switch. It starts to get more interesting in the later, talking confidential terms, share a dark unspoken fear. That's where the melody starts getting a little bit more interesting. But just these two lines, they are very plain, kind of ballad-like 80s rock sound.
Yeah, the transitions are a little clunky, I think, between sections on this song, but it's not too bad. Like, it doesn't ruin the song, I think, but they're a little clunky the way they handle that. They just kind of abruptly, you know, slide into new sections, it feels like.
Well, maybe there was a conscious choice to make it abrupt.
And the only other note I have is just a lot of flanged toms, a very classic 80s drum sound, which is, you know, in our day today is kind of annoying, I think.
Yeah, but the drum parts are very, very nice on this one.
Yeah. Track 3, Fallen on Hard Times.
Falling on hard times, but it feels good to know that milk and honey's just around the bend.
This one's kind of funny to me. It's the main thing that sticks out to me about this one is I would say that this is probably one of the most straightforward, simple, kind of poppy Tull songs that was ever been made. But something about it, I kind of like. It's one of those songs I kind of like it, and I'm not really sure why. I actually quite like it. I listen to it a decent amount, even though I don't listen to this album that much. But something about it is kind of charming. but it's kind of hard for me to place my thumb on exactly what it is.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I really like this one when I used to listen to this album back in the day. Again, probably because it was a simpler one and it was easier for me to latch onto it. But what I like about this one is when we compare the musical elements of this one to, for example, the Pine Martin's Jig, which I wasn't very happy with on the previous episode, we can see how they made this work. This sort of the same elements. We've got the mandolin, the synth, a key bass, a slide acoustic guitar, and all blends really, really well into a very nice sound, while the very same instruments, practically. If you listen to Pine Martin's Jig, it's kind of, sonically, it falls apart for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really does gel together well. And I don't know, this is a song that it feels to me like it was a deliberate attempt to try to make a catchy chart song. That's kind of what it feels like to me. But for some reason, I mean, normally I kind of hate that sort of thing, especially from bands that aren't really predispositioned to do that kind of thing, which is the kind of band I would say Tull are. But I don't know, it's something about this one, it kind of works for me.
Yeah, this is kind of the bungle in the jungle of this album.
Yeah, I suppose so.
In a way.
I really like the very beginning, just the first couple seconds, because it sounds very separate and unique from the rest of the song. It's kind of like in its own little world, and then the actual song kind of slams into it. But I really like that very beginning.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting musical elements here, like the intro, like the reverse hand claps. We've heard them before.
Oh yeah,
they are probably combined reverse and not reverse, but they do have this beginning to them. There's a slide acoustic guitar played, I believe, by Martin Barr, which is not a usual sound for Tull.
Yeah,
and it works so well here.
Some of the key sounds, the keyboard sounds, are a little cheap and old sounding, but contrasted to other tracks on this album, I think that's actually not a bad thing, because on this one they actually sound kind of charming, I think, whereas on other songs they just kind of sound old.
Yeah, I like the stop time. Well, giving us a hard time, my friends, handing us the same line again. It happens twice, and the second time there's a vocoder vocal underneath that. So these two instances of the stop time are different, and if you listen to the second one, you can notice that there's a very kind of breathy, vocodery type sound underneath that. Giving us a hard time.
Yeah, you know, lyrically, this one's unique too, I think, just because I remember reading in an interview with Ian many years ago. It was kind of like a mailbag Q&A thing, and somebody asked him, it was actually asking if the song A Change of Horses was about US politics, was about the change between the Bush and Obama administrations and in the presidency. And Ian said, you know, nice try, but I don't do politics in my lyrics. And to me, this is kind of the biggest exception to that, maybe, in the Tull discography, where, of course, he's not, naming people by name or anything in this song, but it's, in a lot of cases, it's a very, obliquely political song with things, referencing the Prime Minister and the President and that kind of thing, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's clearly, Thatcher.
Yeah, probably.
He's talking about. Yeah, he's just ripping into the political figures of his time. Thematically, this one, I can't really connect it to this idea of the reflection on the human condition, the connection between people, because this is just, I think he called it in some of the liner notes, just to some edition, the woe is me kind of song.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Lyrically, it's not bad. It's not quite straightforward. And it's kind of funny. You've got lines like they've repossessed the Rolls Royce and the Mink.
Yeah.
So and soon there will be raised a holy stink. Wonderful line.
So on the drums, I just kind of have to mention that towards the end of this song, I don't remember exactly where it is, but before one of the choruses, I think there's kind of a classic '80s reverbed tom fill, and just the only reason I mention that is because that kind of belongs in as a textbook definition of what an 80s drum fill is exactly what's played there. It's just, just a very simple reverbed tom fill, which you could find on just countless different songs in the 80s. That was a very big thing then.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you mean. It's after the second stop time, handing us the same line again, and then the toms go in silence, just a tom line, leading into the next part.
But yeah, I like it. It's I think there's nothing amazing about it, but it just scratches some kind of itch for me for some reason.
Yeah, it is a fun song and very Tull-like, actually, given all the 80s elements of it. That we talked about. Melodically, it's 100% Tull.
One of the things that I think about when I think of this song is there's a video of a live performance in Germany on the Broadsword tour, which maybe you've seen before. I think it's one of the more kind of I don't know, widely distributed Tull live recordings maybe that they ever did. And so there's a couple different Broadsword songs in that video, and this is one of them. And so that was a video I watched a lot as a kid, and so I associate that song with that video a lot.
Track 4, Flying Colors.
Don't lay your base while the whole world waits around to see me shoot you down. It's also second.
Well, let's talk about the intro first, because the funny thing, I showed how it works before with Black Sunday, and this is exactly the kind of absolutely straightforwardly demonstrates this harmonic trick where you have E minor, C major, E minor, C minor, and it very narratively displays the story that we're about to witness in this song. A peaceful status quo disturbed by the entry of dissonance. And this song is about the difficulty in maintaining goodwill. I know that the theme of this one, it's something I think probably familiar to all of us. And the more it, for me, hits home incredibly hard, the lyrics in this song. You can probably say that it's very literal. It's not incredibly artistic in the way, it's not too metaphorical. There's not much of an actual story or narrative in this, but it's kind of an honest to God account of a specific kind of relationship, right? And of trying to make things work, of trying not to have a row. Know what I mean? What do you think?
Yeah, so there's a couple tracks on here, maybe I've mentioned this already, but there's a few tracks on here that are difficult for me to distinguish between, and they kind of run together for me, and this is one of those songs.
Really?
And some of that is just because, most of this album I'm pretty familiar with, but there's a couple tracks I'm not, and this is just one of them that I haven't put as many listening hours into as many of the others. So for that reason, it doesn't stick in my mind much. The things that I have about it, I mean, just for one thing, this is a really 80s sounding song. Just
it is.
Off the back. And again, I'm not, you can't really blame things for being what they were at the time they were made, so I'm not trying to, necessarily knock it that way, because it is what it was what it was at the time. But it's another pretty poppy sounding song, I think. Although I think, there are some pretty complex proggy parts in this, which is also pretty interesting. Actually, maybe one of the, proggier pieces on the album. And I think some of the complex keyboard parts are pretty interesting. Especially some of the ones in the back of the mix, they almost kind of sound like they're like an arpeggiator or some kind of random, synth-driven thing. But yeah, I mean, some of the proggy stuff is more interesting, but in general, this isn't one that sticks out in my mind much. If you asked me to, imagine Flying Colors, the song, it would be difficult for me to, place different parts of it.
I don't know, maybe by virtue of the lyrics, by virtue of the theme of this song, and I listened to it closely a lot. This is... I really like this song, despite it being a very kind of 80s rock. But it's in what is, in my mind, the kind of theme of Broadsword and the Beast. This is a very central song. And it's probably a bit of a philosophical statement, right, rather than an exploration. But just the approach of, I'll take the easy line, right? And if I ignore the face you wore, it's just a way of mine to keep from flying colors, to keep... It's not conflict avoidance. It's an attempt, well, I already used that phrase, to maintain goodwill between people, because discussion is one thing, conflict is another, and conflict is not necessary to make things work, to figure things out. How did the conversation get to where we came to blows? Right, having a row is not a constructive thing, but it happens nevertheless. And it's not to me. This song, it doesn't sound preachy. It doesn't sound kind of enlightened, full Zen kind of character telling us to behave. It's a person who is having a fight with his close ones, who's trying not to, but still ends up having one. And they're trying to examine why that happens. And probably, I don't know, this theme is maybe close to my heart. I'm not sure. It must be familiar to everyone. It's probably something I think about a lot. But for this reason, this song is just, to me, is incredibly important.
I bet you're really looking forward to the track-by-track breakdown by Ian on these songs.
Yeah, I'd love to see what he has to say. There's another harmonic thing here. I'm not going to go into all the different chords, all the different subtle kind of key center changes that happen here. There are very interesting things. But again, talked before about sus chords, right? About the chords that don't sound resolved. And here we've got a very specific color on I beg your pardon, on the word colors, to keep from flying colors. Every time we end on that line, we get a sus chord, an unresolved sound, something hanging in the air, something that's not finished, because this is a point, because it is a very tense point of connection between people. I'm not making a ton of sense, but hopefully you know what I mean.
One musical part that sticks out to me is towards the end, I think in the bridge, there's a very interesting kind of keys and drum part, if you know what I'm talking about, where the keys kind of rise and fall along with the drum toms, which is kind of one of the more proggier parts of it that really stood out to my ear as being kind of interesting. Just quite a fast little part. Yeah,
it's got a lot of really clever elements. And with this one, not a lot of kind of straightforward, boring 80s like rock. It changes all the time. It's got a lot of different elements to it.
Track 5, Slow Marching Band.
Would you join a slow marching band and take pleasure in your leaving?
So this is one that's very dramatic sounding, first off, for pretty much the whole song. This is another one that I feel was, I don't know, somewhat chart-minded, maybe. It's really? Very much a ballad. I could really see this song in like an 80s movie or something. It kind of has that kind of soundtracky feel to me. And weirdly enough, this isn't a favorite song of mine necessarily on the album, but for whatever reason, I actually find this song getting stuck in my head a lot at just kind of random moments, even when I don't listen to it that often.
It does have that quality,
Yeah. I really do, though, kind of like... this is a song that it feels personal to me. Like, it feels like a personal Ian Anderson thing. I don't know if it is, but I think particularly just for a child growing up in the United Kingdom and, Scotland back then, having the vision of the slow marching band, I would imagine, I'm not someone who grew up in the UK, but I would imagine was something that was not, uncommon to see as a kid growing up, and which was something that was exciting for children to see. And so I've always kind of connected that song with, Ian Anderson childhood memories.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah, I wrote in my notes that it's not quite a power ballad, but comes close.
Yeah.
For me, with this song, this is where I'm not going to give much of an analysis, but rather a personal story. I'm not sure, I don't know whether this is a kind of a personal song for Ian and is based around his personal memories, or just, again, like he said a lot, telling a story, imagining himself being in another person's head, kind of. But to me, this song acquired a very personal meaning very recently. actually. It wasn't a long time. A couple of years ago, the headmaster of my school passed away. And he used to be kind of a friend of my parents, not necessarily my friend, because when you're a pupil, you're not really friends with your headmaster, as amazing as a person as they may be. But I would be very wrong to say that that person didn't influence my life in some ways. And when he died, they had a public wake at school. I didn't go there because I don't do social collective mourning. But privately, I ended up listening to this specific song many times on repeat and thinking about my headmaster, because it's somehow this song fit the sentiment perfectly. There's a Grateful Dead song that famously has the idea attached to it of remembering people who passed. The song's Ripple. And it's quite different from Slow Marching Band in terms of mood, but there's sort of a common theme of a road, of a path that I think I'm latching onto here. In Ripple there's a line, that path is for your steps alone. And here we've got Walk On Slowly, Don't Look Behind You. These are two very different songs, but they like two different ways of looking at the same ineffable kind of idea. How do we continue to go? How do we carry on when our friends are left behind?
Yeah, totally. This is it's a pretty fitting song for a moment like that.
Mm-hmm. And musically, I have a note that the key in this one, I believe, is E minor. But there's not a lot of E minor in this song, and the tone center slips away all the time because we keep on going with. This is not a song about arrival. This is a song about perpetual motion, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only musical thing I have about it really is just that, there's march snare that comes in towards the later half, which I think is not surprising, on a song titled Slow Marching Band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, musically, I also noticed, a lot of this album, a lot of Broadsword and the Beast, is a certain combination of synth, guitar, bass, and drums that all deliver a line together. Mm-hmm. And there's one element that serves as melodic interest. This is kind of what makes this album a little bit different from other Tull albums that are more complex in that regard. And here we've got the piano that serves as melodic interest, because that's the most ornate, the most detailed part. Yeah. And I really like the little bass piano line, bass/piano, when the piano is playing a line and the bass repeats it. Mm-hmm. So somewhere before the last verse or something like that. It sounds very nice. Did you notice that in the coda there is an out-of-place piano note, kind of something very odd sounding? I didn't notice that until, I believe, yesterday.
Oh, really? No, I don't think I caught it.
Yeah, it's kind of very strange sounding, like Peter just plonked an extra note and they didn't cut it out. Huh. Wonder if that's gonna stay on the remix. Yeah,
now that you're mentioning that, I feel like I do remember hearing that, but I can't conjure it up in my brain. But that sounds familiar, actually.
Yeah, it's on the fade out, so it's not terribly loud. But yeah, it's just a note that I'm not sure what it's doing there. Track 6, Broadsword.
I see a dark sail on the horizon, set under.
Like with Beastie, right? Side opener, a highly metaphorical song, and kind of a song that probably to me it signifies resolve. It symbolizes the readiness to face a challenge, and that's what this song is about for me, because on the surface, very much kind of a Viking song, musically plain, with, I think Ian commented on this one in some liner notes, that this is a less is more kind of song, and I can see that working.
Yeah.
Again, lots of sus chords, suspended this kind of sound, and here it's kind of give this a medieval sort of thing. Yeah. Because the tension never goes away in the face of danger or in the face of a challenge. So this is kind of a song about readiness in that regard, do you think?
Yeah, I think the thing that this song achieves the best is just the scene setting, or sort of the world building that this song is able to do, because I think it's really effective. When you think about, I don't know, the front cover is kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
Maybe a calmer front cover, but it's the tribal drum part is really awesome. I think that works really well, just kind of the floor tom part. And you're right that it's a really minimalist song, which I don't think is that common, for Tull, especially, full band songs. So it's pretty interesting in that regard. I used to like this song a lot more when I was younger, I think, just because I think I mentioned before, but when I was in, middle school age and that kind of thing, I was really into like fantasy novels, like medieval fantasy and that kind of thing. And so for me, that's part of what I loved about Tull as a kid, was because they were a rock band that wrote songs about stuff like that. So, the lyrics and kind of the aesthetics of Broadsword fit into that a lot. And it makes me think actually of, so in Romeo and Juliet, there's, a line early on where the king says to his wife, "Bring me my longsword hoe," which is one of those lines that, every class of kids today laughs at just because of how funny it sounds in like a modern context. But that's kind of what this song makes me think of, is it's that kind of setting, that kind of thing.
I wonder, looking at the cover, I wonder if to a kind of sword nerd type of person, if they would say that the weapon the character is holding is not actually a broadsword.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I mean, just a broadsword is a two-handed sword, right?
Yeah, and that one looks like a one-handed. So yeah, what I just thought, this is just a random thought, but just looking at the cover at the moment, and I thought about the character again, and I imagined could be. Well, not could be. It's just a silly idea. The character on the cover is Jack and the Green gone evil.
Yeah, that's kind of, I don't know. When we did Songs from the Wood, I described Jack and the Green as a kangaroo, but I could also see Jack and the Green as a little fairy type thing like that.
Yeah, kind of a pixie.
Yeah,
pixie kind of thing.
Actually, what the cover makes me think of the most is the song Mayhem Maybe. Do you know that song?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty deep cut. It was, long story short, the instrumental of that song was recorded during Broadsword, but the vocals were not recorded until later, like in the late 80s. And that's a song about evil, manic pixies, sort of malevolent fairies, and so that's kind of what I picture.
Yeah, it could be. Oh, musically, when I mentioned again the suspended chord in this one, I know I talk a lot about resolutions. Musical resolutions and how they can be used to convey or emphasize different meaning, to the point where one can probably ask the question, am I making this up? How can a musical device mean all of these things at once, right? So here I'm explaining the use of the suspended chord is the readiness in the face of danger, and in flying colors I'm explaining it as a tension between two people. But that's the thing. That's right. These musical devices don't have a meaning of their own, but in context, they can turn into a very powerful tool that can make us experience an idea viscerally. Like I think I quoted Yip Harburg before. Yip Harburg, who wrote lyrics to many lovely songs like April in Paris. The quote is, "Words make you think a thought, music makes you feel a feeling, a song makes you feel a thought." And that's what it is. That's kind of the reason where if I'm noticing a specific musical device that emphasizes a context, I will bring it up.
Yeah.
Overall, yeah, this song is a bit martial, and you said it's got kind of a tribal drum part, and the synth brass sounds like a battle call, so there's a lot of kind of narrative elements in it.
Yeah, I was going to mention the trumpet keys, because I think that's one of those things that in retrospect it's kind of unfortunate, because I mean they just sound funny today, I think.
Yeah, maybe they do, but I kind of like this sound. I think in my band's music we have a couple songs where we're using a very similar sound.
I think also, so very close to the end of the song, there's kind of a choir sort of chorus that comes in on Broadsword, which I really don't think was necessary, but yeah, to each his own. It sounds quite odd to me.
Makes it more Viking-y.
Yeah.
Makes you imagine a crowd.
But yeah, I mean, I think in general, it really accomplishes the scene setting really well. It makes you really think of the Viking ship out on the stormy sea, that kind of thing. So it's cool. Track 7, Pussy Willow.
Light of a young morning, she sighs and shifts on the pillow.
So, right, I mean, I'll just say up front that this is a really great song. I think it's by far one of the best on this album. And I would say it's kind of, I don't know, for me it's the one song that really kind of transcends this album, and it kind of takes its place as kind of a rightful, really great Tull song, like on par with all the others for me. I love how the keys and the mandolin work together. Just the sounds that they picked just worked really well, sort of in the beginning.
I really like this song musically. What I'm going to say, I always did. And there is one thing, I believe, that I'm going to criticize about it, and I'm going to do this later. What's musically interesting here is actually the entire song is in 3/4. Basically, it's a waltz. But the chorus, Pussy Willow Down Fur-Lined Avenue, it's got a 4/4 beat superimposed onto that. But if you just disregard the drums, you can notice that it just goes 1 2 3 1 2 3 Pussy Willow Down Fur-Lined Avenue, and you can just sing it to the time of the waltz, and it will be exactly what it is. And I wonder whether Ian actually wrote it as a song with one rhythm first, and then they changed it around to make the chorus more dynamic, or maybe that was the initial idea. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm just going to take a guess, and this could be totally wrong, but part of me actually wonders if it's because Jerry Conway wasn't comfortable with playing different time signatures.
Oh, come on, 3/4, that's the...
Yeah. I remember reading, there's actually a great interview in, I could get this wrong, but I want to say it was Modern Drummer magazine, or it may have been Drummer World website, I don't remember, but many years ago, I think this was probably like in the 90s or something. There was a great article where they interviewed several different Tull drummers, as well as Ian Anderson and maybe some other folks, about the different drummers that Tull have had. And when Ian talked about Jerry Conway, he said that 99% of the time he would play spot on, but there would be 1% where he would just play the song completely wrong, just out of nowhere. And it was kind of like a funny thing. And so I think that's kind of given him a reputation as not a very complex drummer, a drummer who is more keen to just handle kind of simple rhythm and things like that. So I wonder if that would have anything to do with it.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I know the type. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of very cool things in this. In the chorus, I really like the kind of dialogue between the piano and the mandolin and strings, where they go Pussy Willow, boom, on the piano. Down Fur-Lined Avenue, and then ring-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding on the mandolins. The kind of responses, two very different responses to these lines.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It works really, really well. Yeah, this is a kind of a humorous song, because it's, to die for a cause somewhere, the line, anything for a bit of excitement. Yeah, this, to me, this song is kind of about the disconnect from the real world. And it works as kind of the opposite of Falling on Hard Times. The protagonist of Falling on Hard Times is disillusioned with the world because of the way it is, and Pussy Willow is disillusioned because of the way it isn't.
Yeah.
And Falling on Hard Times is confronting the real world, and Pussy Willow is being buried in fantasy.
Yeah, exactly.
And there is a line in this song that I really, really like, to the point where I kind of, again, I end up thinking, was this the first line that Ian came up with? Just because to me it just sounds so brilliant. It's cutting dreams down to size again.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I absolutely adore this line. And kind of through the use of this expression, right, cut down to size, we are invited to examine the notion that dreams have an authorized size, that the society imposes a limit not only on what we can do and what we can achieve, but also what we are certified to dream of. And yeah, of course, there's also the expression, like, to dream big.
Right.
And this turn of phrase is incredibly evocative. And it's a little bit unfortunate, because there's a line in this song that I really, really hate. And this is my point of criticism about this. It's the line, brushing the sleep from her young woman eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, what kind of eyes? Is young woman eyes a specific kind of eyes we're supposed to imagine? Do young women all have the same eyes? Or is this just a roundabout way of straightforwardly telling us that Pussy Willow is a young woman? what's this about? This kind of makes me think of, you know, the parody things tagged men writing women.
So on the subject, I remember, so in that DVD I mentioned, sort of the live video, they play this song, and Ian introduces it as a song about a very sad young woman, and her name is Pussy Willow.
Yeah, and I don't know, just this line just doesn't work, because we could have been told in a different way that Pussy Willow is a young woman, and just sticking that as a characteristic of her eyes, of all things, it's just a bit lazy. I don't know. This is not a very well constructed line, because what are we supposed to imagine here? Her young woman eyes. What kind of eyes are these? We have no idea, because all young women are different. So it doesn't evoke anything. It just sticking the characterization of young woman attached to Pussy Willow into this line, just because, I don't know, it fit the rhythm. Not a good line in my opinion. I'm sorry. And yeah, it's kind of balanced by the fantastic line cutting dreams down to size.
One thing, I mean, this is just sort of an aside, but down Furlined Avenue, for a while I actually thought that was Dunfermline Avenue, which is where Ian was born, the town he was born in Scotland. I thought that was some kind of childhood reference, but I looked it up to make sure, and it was down Furlined Avenue.
Yeah, I believe. What do you think of this line? What do you think it means?
I have no idea what it means, to be honest.
I believe it's just a street full of people wearing expensive furs.
Yeah, I was thinking that, or just like a shop street that sold furs.
Or a shop street, exactly.
Musically, this is another song where I'm not really sure how I feel about it once the rock kicks in. But at the same time, I mean, I think this is a song that it needed to have a climax, that it makes it through, you know, to have kind of a journey from beginning to end. So, and I actually think, you know, when it gets going at the end, it's pretty good. Yeah,
although the rock kicks in, but again, this is, it turns out to be 6/4 instead of 4/4, so it's more interesting as rock goes.
I also want to mention, so during the bridge, you go to cross stick drums with the classic 80s reverb, so another very classic 80s drum sound for the textbooks.
Yeah. Track 8, Watching Me, Watching You.
I sit by the country on the Beaconsfield line. He's watching me, watching the trains go by.
This is a very fun song to me. I like it. I can imagine probably someone not being a massive fan of it because it's a little bit weird, but I really like the drums on this, and I can't really examine the songs on side B as close together as I could with Clasp and Flying Colors. But so it may be kind of tenuous, but this is a song picturing a situation where communication isn't happening. There's no common platform, even a train platform, where a dialogue can occur here. These two people, the protagonist and the watcher, they will never talk, and yet one of them is invading the other's privacy.
Yeah.
And so this is, in a way, this song is a different exploration of boundaries. The boundaries on Clasp, like the boundaries of a personality, the boundaries of Flying Colors, goodwill, and just personal boundaries on Watching Me, Watching You.
This is another song that I like quite a bit, but I'm not really sure why. Obviously, it's the most electronic thing on the album, which is kind of interesting, just kind of sonically comparing it to the others.
Yeah, very fat synth bass.
Yeah. The drums that you mentioned, so obviously, you know, at least most of it is a drum machine. I think maybe there's some live overdubs on the snare that came in later, but I can't really tell. But it sounds like most all of it's drum machine.
Really? I kind of always imagine it just being electronic drums, but played by Jerry.
I guess it could be. I don't know. It sounds quite complicated to have been played live.
To be Jerry.
I could be wrong.
Yeah. One of the things musically I don't really like here is the guitar feels kind of little shoved back. Not just in the mix, but kind of Martin didn't really have a lot of space to add things. He just went kirk.
Yeah, I can see that.
And yeah, but kind of the picture that the story, the song paints is very evocative. I actually know a guy like this. There's someone like that in the art circuit here in my town. Can't stand the bloke. kind of a creepy character.
I hope he's not listening.
No, he isn't. and if he is, well,
is he like a paranoid schizo guy?
No, not a paranoid schizo guy. Just hangs around all the time, watches people.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say he was the guy who thought he was being watched all the time.
No, the other way around. No.
I'm not really sure how I feel about the stairs lines. It sounds kind of... it doesn't really work, I think. I think he was trying to make it sound very abrupt and creepy sounding, but I don't think it really comes off well.
Yeah, I think that the rest of the song accomplishes the kind of apprehensive feeling very well to make the stairs unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. Lyrically, this is just a guess, but I kind of wonder if, much of the next album is kind of dominated by, espionage spy stories, and I kind of wonder if this was maybe the start of that kind of thinking for the lyrics.
Yeah, probably. Could be, but there's not an espionage story, I think, attached to this one. This is just a standard social situation of a well-known person being kind of harassed, stalked even probably by someone. But yeah, the song even sounds a little bit more under rapsy, right?
Totally.
Than the rest of the album. So
I mean, you could kind of see it as a proto under raps thing, maybe. But yeah, I like it. I listened to it a decent amount.
Yeah, it's a good song.
Track 9, Seal Driver.
And you're riding on the swell, and your heart is alive. Think I'll make you my seal driver.
So I'm sorry to say I really don't have a lot on this one. Kind of every track on this album, this is the one that sticks out the least to me, and it kind of runs into Flying Colors for me a bit when I think about it. It's another one that it's very kind of arena rock. It's kind of going for that style again.
Yeah, it does have that about it. Yeah, when you said that there are songs on this album that you find hard to distinguish between, I thought you meant Seal Driver and Clasp, because they have the exact same harmonic kind of basically the exact same part in them. Because like in Seal Driver, you've got this.
Yeah.
Right, and it's basically the same thing as verse 3 of the Clasp.
Yeah, it did make me think of Clasp again, kind of, that you heard that not that long ago.
Yes, same trick. So I wonder if it was intentional or if it was a sound that they really liked and put it into a couple different songs, or if they didn't notice that they did, because that thing can happen as well. I'm afraid to say, I'm not sure. And I remember me being a little bit annoyed about Ian in some liner notes saying that Home from Stonewatch was a romantic song, because homeliness is not a romantic notion. And so this is what I think of a romantic song in the proper sense of the word. And this is it's kind of a love song, right? It's a song addressed to a person that the protagonist loves, but it's using seal hunting in rough seas as a metaphor for a relationship and for being together. And that's the kind of properly romantic 19th century romantic picture, right? Challenging the elements together apart from the rest of the world.
So that's actually funny, because before we started recording today, I looked up what a seal driver was, because I had no idea. I thought maybe it was something to do with actual seals, but I wasn't sure.
It actually is to do with actual seals, because I think it's a coincidence that a seal driver is a kind of a tool, because I did look it up yesterday as well.
Because that was what I found.
Of the things. Yeah, no, I think I found elsewhere that a seal driver is a kind of boat that drives seals onto a shore and allows other people to hunt them. So it's like hunting in pairs, if you will, pairs of boats or multiple boats, but one of them is like on a hunt, driving the prey onto the hunter.
Yeah, well, I think that makes a lot more sense than the modern version of seal driver.
Yeah, I don't think that was the intended meaning, because that would have been incredibly strange. Because there's a very nautical theme here, so clearly it has to be connected with seal hunting, rather than a tool for attaching pieces of rubber onto pipes, or whatever that is. And Interestingly enough, in the lyrics, in context of the album, this song at the end kind of strips away the metaphor and pretense. Kind of it's not quite breaking the fourth wall, but it's just doing away with the story element. Could you fancy me as a pirate boat or a longship Viking warrior? It's basically saying that the Aesop language is done with. Right, the stories we imagine, the Broadsword song and the rest, we're just using these stories to look at the real world in a certain way. Because in the first verses of Seal Driver, we are still on the high seas, right? Maybe not the high seas, because seal hunting is done in islands. But we're still there, we're still these characters. And at the end, we are not these characters anymore, we're just real people who are using that to think about what we are. I'm an insureman, I'm nobody's hero, right? I used to be a hero in Broadsword, yes? I was standing with a sword waiting for enemies to strike. But here, not anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only other thing I have on it is, one thing that did stick out to me was I actually quite like the keys sound during the later part of the guitar solo. I think that melds very well together.
Yeah, I mean, the blending of different instruments on most of this album is very, very well executed. Most of this album, I mean, what I said about the guitar on Watching Me, Watching You, that just hangs on the side. But the rest, the keys together with the guitar and the other instruments, very, very well put together. Track 10, Cheerio.
Along the coast road by the headland, the early lights of winter.
Well, difficult to talk a lot about this one, I believe. I wonder if the bagpipes on it are real, or if they are synthesizer, because they talked a lot about difficulties in recording a bagpipe, right? When it's always not quite in tune with the rest of the instruments, and it had to be tape manipulated and whatever. This song is kind of, I don't know, Cup of Wonder times Grace.
Yeah, I relate it very much to the kind of, Fire at Midnight, Weathercock type kind of cozy, homely songs from the folk era.
Yeah.
It's really nice. I mean, I like it a lot. Yeah, I think for what it is, it's really nice. I actually like I'm guessing that's the vocoder back there. I like the vocoder voice. I could see how others could find it annoying maybe, but it works for me. I kind of like it.
Musically, it has a similar element to other songs like Clasp and Seal Driver and other places, which at this point I'm starting to believe that was a kind of Peter Vitesse thing. It's got this suspended bass note where different chords are played over the same bass note, and that's what the song begins with. It goes along the coast road by the headland, same note in the bass. So it very cohesive with the rest of the album in terms of musical devices that it uses. Love this song. Quite short, I believe. I'm not sure it could have been longer, because it works really well the way it is.
The ending is strange to me. I mean, first off, what do you think? Do you think the instrumental outro was necessary? I kind of feel like the song could have just ended with the vocals.
Yeah, it kind of serves as a very long fade out.
Yeah.
I wonder. They even changed the key there.
Yeah.
They played the instrumental part is played in a different key. Just
the weirdest thing to me is that it fades out so unsatisfactorily.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, but also you can imagine just a ship disappearing in the distance.
Yeah, just there's a conclusion to that melody that's being played, and it like the conclusion of the melody and the fade out kind of happen at the exact same time, and it
doesn't let it resolve quite.
Yeah, it makes it feel kind of redundant. I mean, I feel like you should either end the melody when it ends, or you should fade it out. And they kind of try to do both at once, and it makes it sound kind of strange.
I know what you mean. Yeah, there is a resolution in the melody, and they don't let it happen.
Yeah, there's kind of a similar moment on Under Wraps, which I'll mention. It's nowhere near as important as this moment, but there's kind of a similar thing they do, which sounds kind of strange.
Yeah, I'll be very curious to hear that. There is a version of this song. I don't think we'll ever come to discussing that album because it's kind of a deep cut in terms of Tull compilations. But there's a recording called "The Beacon's Bottom," which was some of classic Jethro Tull songs reinterpreted in, I think, 1993 or around that time. And we probably shouldn't talk about that because the only thing it will accomplish, it will give me the reason to be very, very angry. Because to me, well, if there is the worst Tull record ever, I can come out and say that the Beacon's Bottom is the worst Tull record ever conceived.
I've never even heard of that.
I see no reason to reinterpret these songs the way they did, and especially on Cheerio, they kind of did it in a folk rock kind of way with a solo mandolin, and it just sounds like a bad Jethro Tull cover band, like a bad folk rock band, kind of Celtic folk rock band who decided to do Jethro Tull. Inexplicable and inexcusable, in my opinion.
That's not the tribute album that Glenn Cornick played on, is it?
No. It's straight Jethro Tull, played by Tull musicians, but just badly.
I've never heard of that. I gotta look that up. It's worth mentioning that this song kind of ended live concerts for a while for Tull, which I think makes sense. I think they usually lip synced it actually when they did this.
I'm not even sure they even had to lip sync because it's like it was just playback.
Yeah.
They put it on and left the stage.
Oh, okay. I don't remember that. So in the 82 DVD I'm talking about, Ian comes out and mimes to it.
Okay.
I mean, I like it for what it is. I think the ending was handled very weirdly, but I mean, aside from that, I think, for what it is, I like it.
Yeah, it's a very nice one.
So for me, this is really one of the Tull albums that I have the most mild opinions on, I suppose. Like I said, I don't really like it. I don't really not like it. I feel kind of, complacent about most of the tracks on here. But there's a couple that I really like. I just take what I like from it. A lot of it, I don't know what a lot of it, but, substantial parts of it run together for me as just kind of 80s attempts at arena rock or chart rock or whatever you want to call it. And I'm really interested to know kind of how influential Paul Samuel Smith was as a producer in this album, and I expect we'll sort of get to hear more about that when the remix booklet comes out.
Yeah, like I said, this album has a special place in my heart, and I'm not praising it as a work of genius from beginning to end, but I find it hard to not enjoy every track on it. So I really like it for what it is. And yeah, very much looking forward to the Steven Wilson remix, because maybe some of the drum sounds will be dealt with. Yeah,
that'd be nice. Do you have a top 3 and bottom 3?
Not 3, definitely.
Yeah.
I will say my top favorite track on this one is "Flying Colors." I know you don't like it. I know you don't like it as much as the others, but for me, just the goosebumps don't lie. And least favorite, maybe Seal Driver, or maybe Pussy Willow because of that one line, and not because of the music, because the music is wonderful. But very, very difficult to name a bottom track because just this album is so solid.
Yeah, I have a top 3, and then for my bottom, I really like I said, like there's nothing that's that offensive to me on this album. There's nothing that I really feel that strongly about. So I have one track I put in my bottom, which I sort of actively don't like that much. But for my top 3, it was kind of clear for me, which is Pussy Willow, Clasp, and Fallen on Hard Times. Those are the 3 that I enjoy the most on this album for sure. And the only bottom, I had Beastie as my one bottom track. That's the only one that doesn't really sit well with me. But the other tracks that I'm not inclined towards, it's not that I dislike them, it's just that they don't really do much for me. It kind of feels like, I don't know, you're trying to eat a big calorie meal, but you just drink water. That's kind of what a lot of those tracks feel like to me. They just kind of pass through.
Yeah, I can get that not everyone will find or hear things in this album that I do, because one of the reasons should be I have a long history with it.
Yeah.
And, when we have a long history with a record, it becomes important for us in many different ways, irrespective of how well accomplished it is musically.
Yeah, totally. And that's something that I'll get to talk about a bit on my own in the next episode.
Yeah, very much looking forward to that.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. We're really interested to see what your comments are on Broadsword. We've been getting some really good comments on every episode from everybody. I really enjoy how all of you are, thinking so seriously and critically about all this music alongside of us. It's really fun for us to read. So let us know what you think about Broadsword. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you feel mild about it, like I do? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with Under Wraps.
Cheers.